Okay, it's quite an exciting one. I've been quite excited to talk about this one. OM System are releasing a new camera. It's the OM-1 II. This is the successor to the original OM-1, which, if you can believe this, came out a couple of years ago, which I can't even believe that that's true, but it is true. Now, that camera was genuinely fantastic. And actually, 2022, I said probably my favorite camera that I've used this year. And that is the OM System OM-1. It really blew me away because I wasn't particularly expecting to love it. I thought it'd be fine, but I ended up really liking it. So OM-1 II, I was understandably quite excited about because one of my favorite cameras the last couple of years, there's a new version. And on paper, when I went through the spec before kind of getting my hands on the camera and really trying it out, it does look like it's a little bit of an iterative update, right? Nothing crazy, just everything slightly improved. And that can sometimes feel a little bit deflating. It's not always the most exciting as a big headline feature. But even so, I was very excited to get my hands on it and really try it out, which is what I've been doing over the last 3 days. And of course, this camera is geared, I would say, towards outdoor kind of stuff, right? So a lot of wildlife, nature, landscape, like a lot of stuff like that. So I've tried to get out and about as much as possible with this camera. And while there is some new hardware actually in the camera, we've got a new processor, a new chip, we have got, as far as I can tell, the same sensor in the camera. So I can understand initially feeling like, okay, is this worth the upgrade? But it really is all in the feel of the camera. It's very difficult to get a grasp of what a camera is going to be like on paper, because on paper, things look a very specific way. They have a specific feel to them and you think, okay, I get it. But really, it's not until you actually get your hands on with this camera and you start using it that you see it's more than just those sort of small step ups. The actual feel of using this camera is pretty impressive, actually. And once again, I am left with the feeling with a Micro Four Thirds camera of, why am I so obsessed with full frame? Why am I bothered about it? Because a Micro Four Thirds camera like this has been unbelievably good to use. And while the image quality at the end, so the end result, is probably quite similar, if not basically the same actually as the original OM-1, the way you get there is such a joy. The actual act of using this camera is such a joy. And there's so many different ways to use it, and it excels in so many different directions. It's super impressive. And it leaves me once again wondering whether, should I switch to Micro Four Thirds? So let's get into exactly what's different, what's new, what we're talking about, what's going on here. Let's talk about the OM-1 II. Now, if you're familiar with the original OM-1 or OM System cameras in general, you will be quite comfortable with this camera. It's very similar to the OM-1 in the way that things are laid out. It's quite ergonomic. You've got things like the nice flip out screen, which I really like. I always like that on a camera like this. And especially if I'm doing, a mixture of different stuff, right? Wildlife, landscape, nature, maybe some portrait, maybe some street, who knows, right? Loads of different stuff. Then absolutely, it's useful to have a flip out screen to be able to maneuver the camera around and still see what you're shooting. There are some differences on the body, and some of the most notable ones that I would say at least are the actual dials are rubberized and they just feel more tactile. And that's important. And I noticed that especially because it's very cold out and about. And so while I was out and about kind of traipsing around, sometimes I'd have gloves on, sometimes I wouldn't, but eventually my hands would hurt so much that I'd pop the gloves back on. And it really helped. Having more sort of rubberized tactile feel to these really was useful, genuinely. It sounds like a kind of thing that you're not going to be that fussed about. But again, it's all in the field, right? When you're out in the field taking those photos, it's a useful thing to be able to feel it even through the gloves. Otherwise, you've got a lot of similar stuff here with the way it kind of works. You can actually move the menu button as well to the remove button, which is useful if you want to keep one hand, like if you've got a telephoto lens like this, one hand always on the lens, and you want to be able to control things without having to take your hand off that lens. Incidentally, this is the new 150 to 600mm lens, which we have got a review on the channel for. Yes. But otherwise, let's talk about some of the biggest things that I noticed immediately while using this camera, which really stood out. The number one thing for me is the autofocus. Now, the autofocus was already very good with the OM-1, and autofocus generally these days across the board, pretty much within the photographic industry, is crazy good. It's really, really, really good. But what I will say is that with the OM-1 too, it is absolutely astonishing how useful it is. And if you are doing wildlife shots, if you're doing nature shots, if you're taking photos of creatures and fast moving things or multiple creatures, you're going to notice it immediately. The subject detection is unbelievable. Now, this has been improved from the OM-1. There's a new AI subject detection in the camera, and it does just pop a square around your subject, and no matter really what subject I was aiming at, so whether it was small birds, squirrels, birds in flight, people, whatever it would be, that little square would appear, and then another little square would just go around the eye, and it would just track them around the frame as they moved around, as I moved the camera. No problem. OM System told me that they felt like subject detection had been basically perfected with this camera. And that sounds like marketing speak. But I've got to be honest, it really does feel like that. It is unbelievable to watch it in action. Whether it's through trees, through leaves, through foliage, whether they go behind a tree and then pop back out, it's unreal how good it is. And if you have multiple subjects in frame at once, you can actually just select between them. It's super fast, it's super easy, and it just makes your life as a photographer so much better because you can focus on the framing, you can focus on actually tracking them yourself and getting that end result that you want. There's also better subject recognition when it comes to humans as well. So no longer just face or eye, but actually it's able to recognize humans even from kind of behind or the side, just I guess from the shape of the people, right? Which is great if you're taking street photos, if you're doing portraits, if you're trying to take a lot of far shots, maybe at an event or something like that, it is going to recognize the person, pop a square over them, and track them around the frame. Multiple people, well, now there's multiple squares. Which one would you like to photograph? It's so good. Now, add on to that improved blackout-free sequential shooting at lower frame rates. Weirdly, it was always quite good with the higher frame rates, but not as good with the lower frame rates on the OM-1, but it's improved with the OM-1 too. And of course, you've got up to 50 frames a second shooting with this when you're shooting with continuous autofocus, and up to 120 frames a second with SAF, which is, that's quick. That's very, very quick. And a better buffer as well. So 256 raw photos with continuous autofocus. But that's not the only area where things are improved. The image stabilization is improved here as well. So up to 8.5 stops, which is crazy because I already thought it was very good with the OM-1, but it is very noticeable. So whether you are shooting with just a very slow shutter speed, which you can see some photos here, which I took using a slow shutter speed, I don't think the composition is anything to particularly write home about, but I do think it's interesting that I was able to shoot with shutter speeds of this kind of length. That's completely handheld. Or whether you are doing handheld video with this camera, you're going to really appreciate that better image stabilization. Something which I didn't used to love about Olympus cameras, and something which, I'll be honest with you, I really, really love about this camera, and I liked about the OM-1 as well, are the different kinds of ways that you can shoot with it. There's kind of different modes you can put this camera into, which in the past to me, I guess I kind of thought of as more gimmicky things, but they really are genuinely incredible. They're very useful ways to take your photos. So things like your high resolution shot mode, which lets you do 50 megapixels handheld. So it takes a series of photos and then puts them together to give you a really high resolution shot, 80 megapixels if it's on a tripod, because of course it's not having to worry about stabilizing any handshake. You've got your things you'd probably expect from a camera like this, so live composite, starry sky AF, and focus stacking, which is slightly improved actually for macro photographers, which is great to hear. But where we see a nice upgrade from the OM-1 is with the live ND filters that you can use. Now, this is a really clever method of applying essentially like an ND filter to your photo without having to put any filter on your lens, which saves you a lot of money, saves you a lot of time and a lot of effort. It's actually crazy how useful this is, and I would absolutely use this all the time. So the live ND filter by itself we saw in the OM-1. Now, essentially, like I say, it's like having an ND filter just on the front of your lens, except you don't have to have it. It's all done in camera digitally. And now you can do that all the way up to ND 128. So if you want a really, really dark ND filter for those long exposure photos, you can do that. But what I think is crazy, and I can't believe it works, and it's so good, is the live graduated ND filter. This allows you to digitally, all in camera, put a graduated ND filter onto your photo before you take it. You can change the ND to ND2, 4, 8, and you can move it around and place it exactly where you want it to be. So you can rotate it, you can have it on an angle. And if this is something you've thought about dabbling with, but it just seems too tricky, too fiddly, it's not worth it. This is such a good solution to that problem, and something I could see myself using loads because it's just so easy to do. It's right there in the menus. You just set it up. It's a few presses of a few buttons, and then away you go. You're taking the photos. Everything about this is designed to make your life as a photographer just better and easier. And I love it. I would not normally be that fussed about those kind of modes in a camera. You know, like I said before, they feel sometimes a bit gimmicky, but they really work in the OM-1 too. They really work, and it's incredible to see. Now, of course, this is a hybrid camera. We're in 2024. Cameras, generally speaking, are going to be video cameras as well as photography cameras. And the video specs here are absolutely fine. It doesn't kind of blow you away, the video specs. And I think that that's fine. I don't think it's trying to. I don't think that's what it's about, but it's still very good, right? Someone like me who does both video and photo, I'd be completely satisfied with the video capabilities here. So 4K, 60 frames a second, Full HD up to 120 frames a second, 10-bit video as well internally, which is useful, vertical video, which is useful these days as well. And then you've got things like HLG modes and OM log as well, which is great to have in the camera. Would I have loved to see 4K 120? Of course I would. Of course I'd love to see 4K 120 frames a second. If I'm honest, that would really finish off this camera for me personally. That would really be the icing on a lovely, delicious bit of cake. But it's not in there, and to be honest with you, to me, it feels more like a photography camera anyway. I'd want to be using it for photos. That's what excites me about the OM-1 too. That's what I would find the most appealing. So I don't really mind that much that it doesn't have the 4K 120 because I'm not kind of thinking in that mode. I'm really thinking photography-wise. And photography-wise, this is, difficult to find reasons to be anything other than elated with it. That's not a word I use very often, but I'm breaking it out right now. I have absolutely adored my time with the OM-1 too. Just like with the OM-1, I almost cannot believe how much I'm loving a Micro Four Thirds camera. Does that sound a bit snobby? Maybe. And I guess that is a question I need to ask myself. Why is full frame so important? Is it? I mean, arguably not. Every time I use a Micro Four Thirds camera, I am super excited and happy about the size and the weight of the lenses. I mean, this is a 150 to 600, and it's just not that big. It's just not that big compared to some 150 to 600 millimeter lenses that I have used. And this camera is such a joy to use. I really can't recommend it enough. If you're thinking about switching to Micro Four Thirds, if you even come from the OM-1, I think you're going to find lots and lots of reasons to love this camera. The only reason maybe you wouldn't is if you're only shooting video, I guess you wouldn't get the most out of this camera. But if you're shooting photos, oh yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. I'm all about it. You can check out the full spec, all of the info, the pricing, all of that fun stuff by checking out the link down in the description. There's a link to go and check that out on parkcameras.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well because there's new content all the time. We've got a review of this lens as well on the channel already. I will see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.